Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, depending on where you are connecting today. First of all, on behalf of the organizers, we would like to share Happy International Women's Day and share our highest appreciation to all the women human rights defenders who are fighting for a better society and countering the patriarchal narratives around the world. Welcome to the discussion, and today's discussion is the side event in conjunction with the 14th session of the UN Human Rights Council session, which is happening this month. The topic of our discussion today is defenders in Asia, holding the line amid mounting challenges. Before starting, I would like to thank the co-sponsor of this event, World Organization Against Torture, OMCT, CIVICUS, and also International Service for Human Rights, ISHR. I'm Benny Agus Prima from Forum Asia's Human Rights Defenders Program, and I will moderate the discussion today. Before starting, I would like to share some house rules and announcement. First of all, this event is broadcasted live on Forum Asia's Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and also LinkedIn. If you have any questions or comments for those joining via Zoom, you can put in the Q&A section, and for those joining via social media, you can leave your questions in the comments, and our team will help to pass on the questions to the Zoom platform. There are two parts of the discussion today. In the first part, we will hear the keynote speech from Mary Lawlor, the Special Rapporteur on situation of HRDs, and then it will be continued with short discussion on reflection of 2021 from all the four speakers. And then the second part will focus on the recommendations and steps that we can take together as a human rights community to better protect the defenders. The discussion will last for around 90 minutes, and the recording will also be available after the event. The objective why we are organizing this today is to reflect on the situation of defenders and highlight the key trends of attacks against them, and also to come up with concrete recommendations to all the stakeholders, including UN bodies, government, and even business. Before starting and passing on the platform to Mary, I would like to start with sharing a bit of overview of what Forum Asia has found in the past 1 year when it comes to the situation of defenders. Hope you can see my screen, sorry. Yeah, as you can see here, we are doing a documentation of human rights defenders cases across Asia. In 2021, we note at least 834 cases of harassment against defenders in 18 countries in Asia. But of course, this number is only touching the surface, if I might say. Looking at all the crises happening in Myanmar, Afghanistan, and other parts of Asia, the number is likely going to be more. And this is just our documentation, and we try to see the patterns of the most common type of violations from these numbers. From date at 834 cases, we note at least 2,486 defenders, including NGOs, were affected. And in most cases, pro-democracy defenders calling for the government reforms, accountability to the government are the most targeted. And then the second most targeted is the women human rights defenders, who are not only targeted because of what they are doing, but also because of their identity. And the third, the most common group that are harassed are media workers with 188 cases, and so on and so forth. And you can see yourself on the screen. But again, this is only touching the surface of what is actually happening on the ground. This is the most common type of rights violated. A lot of times when defenders are exercising their freedom of expression, they are being violated by the government using repressive laws, and then it affecting their right to a liberty and security, because a lot of time they are being arbitrarily detained, incommunicado, and so on and so forth. And during this COVID period, especially like the right to freedom of assembly are also highly impacted, because the space is getting keep going shrinking over time during this the past 2 years in the pandemic. And this is the nature and abuses of violations. This is the pattern that we have noted continue to happen at least in the past decade. The most common type of violations is continue to be judicial harassment, the use of repressive laws to harass the defenders, to criminalize them. And a lot of times it's also coupled with the arbitrary arrest and detention. And in many cases, we found that fabricated charges are being used against the defenders as well. In many parts of Asia, unfortunately, physical violence, including killings, continue to happen. And last year, we witnessed Myanmar and Afghanistan situation where the rate of killings are rising exponentially. And also intimidation and threats are very much prevalent in the region. And this a lot of time not only happening to the defenders, but also their family members and their loved ones. If you see here in short, the judicial harassment is more than half of the cases that we are recording are related to judicial harassment. So this is the brief overview in numbers. At least 17 categories of defenders were affected, and then 296 defenders that we are able to record have lost their life in the past year. And this number is raising like very, very high compared to the previous year. And then 84% of the total cases of violations were still perpetrated by the state actors, the one that's supposed to provide protection to the defenders. So I will stop the brief overview here, and I would like to invite the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights defenders, Mary Lawlor, to share her thoughts and keynote speech to kickstart this discussion today. Mary, the floor is yours.
Thank you very, very much, Benny, for having me. And to be honest, you know, I'm not the expert here, you all are. At the moment, I'm in Geneva. I'm presenting my report to the Human Rights Council on Friday. And it's the first report I've been able to present in person because of COVID. It's on the issue of human rights defenders all over the world who are targeted for their work in exposing corruption. I really want those people, those human rights defenders who are working against corruption to be brought into the human rights defender shell, if you like, shell of protection, because they're very much left outside. I know it's an issue in Asia also, and it is in every continent, that where defenders who have been peacefully advocating against corrupt practices are harassed, jailed, and even killed. And I'd like to thank all of you who helped in the research for this report by providing us with information. On Friday, when I present the report to the UN member states, as you know, they will ask me questions and I will answer. And those of you who are interested generally in ever looking at any of the Human Rights Council sessions, you can see it on UN TV. There's a live broadcast. And the two main tools I have for the mandate are just this: it's raising cases with government states on human rights defenders. And I take a people-centered approach. I really want to make it clear, insofar as I'm able, that who human rights defenders are, why they shouldn't be targeted for their peaceful, legitimate work, and the duty of states to protect them. So I'm raising cases all the time. The other two things as part of the mandate that you do is, you know, you do the report to the Human Rights Council and you do the one to the General Assembly, and that is followed by interactive dialogue with states on both occasions. And then I have 2 country visits a year. I'm trying to make the mandate as accessible as possible. I've talked to thousands of human rights defenders all over the world in the last couple of years. And we set up a website to try and make it a bit more accessible to those defenders who may not be connected nationally, regionally, or internationally. And the website is called srdefenders.org. And we've just released a very short video, animated video, translated into 6 languages, that explains how defenders can contact me and what I can and can't do. It's very short. So I encourage you to both look at it, and if there are languages that it needs to be translated into, if you have capacity to put subtitles or something on, be in touch, that would be great. I spoke to you this time last year, and then since then much has happened, not least in Asia. We've been challenged by trying to help defenders in Afghanistan, and still are. I've had so many meetings with Afghan defenders and trying to help them both inside the country and trying to help them to reach safety either inside or outside. And of course, as you know, getting states to accept Afghan women human rights defenders and men human rights defenders and defenders generally has been exceedingly challenging, and there are many, many still who would like to leave who cannot. Because the issue has failed. It's just gone from the agenda now, and it's been taken over by Ukraine. But yet the threats and challenges remain very grave in Afghanistan. And you'll know that some issues, some countries, some defenders get more media and political attention than others, but all defenders need protection and deserve protection, and none should be at risk for their peaceful human rights work. So over the last couple of years, I've met those defenders working in very remote areas and isolated areas, because one of my priorities is to try and reach those who are very isolated, because obscurity can deepen risk. Defenders who are working away from the spotlight without much support and who don't have access to international NGOs or to friendly embassies have added layers of vulnerability. So I think that is something that is always going to be with us. And we know from our work preparing last year's report on the killings of human rights defenders and on our work since then, that defenders working on the environment, land rights, or Indigenous people rights are particularly at risk. And I was very interested in your synopsis there, Benny, where you talked about student and youth. I'm trying to develop research on student and youth defenders and children who are human rights defenders and being targeted. So I'd be very grateful for any information you have on that. So, and as you rightly pointed out on this International Women's Day, there are defenders in Asia and elsewhere who are targeted not only for who they are, but for what they do. And women human rights defenders are one of my priority areas. And, you know, today we should rejoice in what women human rights defenders have been able to achieve so far, but so much still needs to be done in patriarchal or fundamentalist or militaristic societies, that we have to keep on working and keep on redoubling our efforts, I suppose. And so in the almost 2 years that I've been working, I'll share with you some of the things I've learned from listening to thousands of defenders since I took up the mandate. To be honest, it's not anything new. You'll know it already, and it's something that I've known for very many years, but it's just been reinforced by meeting all these defenders. When we talk about whether things are getting worse or better, I think we should be very careful not to keep saying everything gets worse every year, because at some stage or another, there'll be nowhere else to go. So I would encourage, you know, in reports and that, don't bring out your point in a different way, because I am fearful that, you know, if every year everything is always getting worse, at the end of the day, there'll be nowhere left to go. It'll be so bad. And it diminishes, I think, the substance of the reports. And what we see, as I said, that's been happening in Afghanistan and the murder of human rights defenders in the Philippines. And at the moment, I'm trying to work to influence the draft law that is currently stalled in the Senate. The attacks on human rights defenders in India and elsewhere. They're all atrocious and horrible and shouldn't happen. But there has also been a huge growth in the human rights movement. And what I do in my mandate is I try to focus on those who are trying to help others at great personal risk. And they're the ones that have been taking the food and medicine to communities under repeated COVID restrictions, and those who work for women and children's rights, who those human rights defenders who mobilize against illegal land grabs or deforestation, or document torture in custody or arbitrary detention or judicial harassment, or defend people in court. We need all these people so much, and you are all those people. Second, I'm never, ever, I'm always amazed at the doggedness and the determination of human rights defenders who, despite receiving death threats or being at risk of going to prison or having their families attacked because of their human rights work, and also those defenders who get up in the morning and don't know whether they'll even be alive that night. It is an extraordinary work to undertake, to be a human rights defender. Ordinary people doing extraordinary things. I sometimes hear well-meaning people describe human rights defenders as tireless or fearless. But to be honest, they're really not. I know many of you are exhausted and scared, and you're not superhuman. And I don't think you should pretend that you are superhuman, because it puts added stress onto you. The point is, you carry out the work anyway. You get up in the morning and you do your work every morning, because that's what you're committed to. And fourth, we all know that human rights work is a long, hard struggle. It's like, rolling the boulder up the hill, one bit forward and two bits back. And I know this even from my own experience. I started in the 70s, and you see countries come up and go down. You see different styles of government, you see different violations, but the main thing is that the human rights struggle continues, because there are enough people in the world to believe that it can be a better place for others. And that is why all human rights defenders do that work. And we also know that eventually, it's like that line in this Leonard Cohen song, the crack of light, where the light comes in. And I always think of, there is a tipping point. There's always a tipping point. And at some point, the rock gets worn away by the little stream. So we just have to keep battering away. All of you do it much more than I do, battering away at that rock, so that you'll wash it away. And I know also that human rights defenders say they learn solidarity from each other, and they draw strength from each other. And that is a huge motivator for defenders all over the world. So I leave it at that now. But just because of what Russia is doing at the moment, if you don't mind, I was very inspired by a woman called Anna Politkovskaya in Russia, who was murdered for her human rights work. And then, because it's International Women's Day, I'd like to read you something she said, which to me sums up the spirit of human rights defenders everywhere around the world, no matter the geographic place or the political environment they're in, or the culture they come from. So she said, each time I go there, people tell me things. She was talking about the Russian invasion of Chechnya and the Chechen War. People tell me things. They do so in the sincere hope that if I record what is actually happening, it will lead to change, to peace. Obviously, I am not to blame for what is going on, but the more I think about it, the more I think about it, the more I would be betraying these people if I walked away. So the only thing to do is to take this to the bitter end, so that no one can say, when things became difficult, I ran away. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mary. That was very, very inspirational, and it's a very great positive note from your keynote speech. And moving on to the next part of the discussion, I have one question that I want to ask to all the four esteemed speakers. But before that, I would like to introduce the four esteemed human rights defenders and women human rights defenders with us today. First, we have Frinda Grover. Frinda is a lawyer, researcher, and human rights activist based in Delhi, India. And she has appeared in many landmark cases representing victims, survivors of sexual violence, domestic violence, communal conflict, extrajudicial executions, and forced disappearances, custodial torture, and targeting of human rights defenders. She has also argued in various constitutional challenges, including challenging the internet shutdown imposed in Jammu and Kashmir back in 2019. In 2018, Vrinda was conferred an honorary doctorate of Laws degree by SOAS, University of London, in recognition of her contribution to the area of human rights and civil liberties. So, Vrinda, my first question to you would be, what is your reflection of 2021 based human rights defender situation in India to date? What are the challenges, and if there's any case studies or something that we can take up together in reflection of 2021?
Thank you, Benny. Thank you for Ramesha, and thank you, Mary Lawlor, for a very important overview, but as well said with sensitivity and providing some optimism to move forward. I want to begin by sending my salutations to particularly women human rights defenders for the determination with which they continue to be at the forefront of so many struggles for justice and equality. In India, the range of people who are being targeted as human rights defenders, because they really become those who are either amplifying the atrocities or mediating or seeking redress, which include lawyers, journalists, trade unionists, indigenous leaders who are fighting for control over natural resources, right to information activists, as well as student leaders and environmentalists. The pattern that has emerged, and this has now been there for a few years, it has got very clearly crystallized in India, is the use of law, the weaponization in particular of criminal law and anti-terror draconian legislation to not just intimidate, but incarcerate human rights defenders. And the direct impact is not only on those struggles, but also the widespread chilling effect, which we cannot deny anymore, which it does have on many other movements and struggles. Law also tends to give a certain garb of legality to the actions of the state, although the actions are totally not only illegal and also immoral, because the draconian laws, particularly in India, the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, or the National Investigating Agencies Act, which were meant for terror attacks or unlawful organizations, are today being used against human rights defenders. We have cases such as what is called, and Mary Lawlor is familiar with one of them, having spoken at the event when we lost one of our very important human rights defender, Father Stan Swamy, who died in custody, in judicial custody, an 80+ human rights defender suffering from Parkinson, incarcerated in a case. The case that began in 2018, in which prominent human rights defenders from across the country continue to be incarcerated. Stan Swamy has died in judicial custody. We think it's an institutional murder. One human rights defender lawyer has only been released on bail. All the others continue to be incarcerated without any trial. And that is what is important to note here, that these laws are today being used in a manner where people are kept in prison for long. The same is the story with the Delhi riots of 2020 cases. And here you have young leaders, young student leaders leading protests against introduction of discriminatory citizenship laws, and also very particularly targeting the Muslim minority community. Many of those leaders coming from young Muslim leaders emerging as human rights defenders and leaders of their community, all of whom participating in peaceful groups and assemblies, raising concerns in a democratic way. They're all in jail since 2020 in this particular case. We are quickly moving on. So you have the same pattern that appears. Journalists, again, I want to emphasize that the targeting within the group also is today specifically targeting Muslims. You have Muslim women, journalists and women activists of the Muslim community who face a particular kind of targeting, including online cyberbullying of a sexualized nature, meant to silence them from using internet as a forum of their freedom of expression. You have journalists like Siddiq Kapan going to do their job to cover a protest, to cover a rape, arrested, languishing in jail. Nothing ever, actually, the trials don't commence. I also want to talk about the criminalization in particular of human rights work in Kashmir. Ever since 2019, with the change of constitutional status, all human rights organizations that have been documenting the kind of violations that take place, particularly in Kashmir, which is a militarized zone, they've all had raids by the National Investigating Agency, cases pending under anti-terror laws, senior activists already arrested and incarcerated, like Khurram Parvez from Kashmir. The journalists over there, simply for reporting on an extrajudicial killing, are facing incarceration, and each time bail is granted, they are again put away. Then you have the NGO sector, which provides a range of services within the country, including raising issues of human rights. The FCRA law is used to either choke them or to deny them any avenue to continue their work. I'll quickly finish by simply saying that today we notice that law, the weaponization of law and anti-terror laws, is being used to silence, intimidate, and imprison human rights defenders. And we'll perhaps later in the discussion talk about how law, which is meant to be enabling, has today become the source of silencing human rights defenders and human rights work. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vrinda. I think this issue of weaponization of laws and the use of repressive laws is getting a bit more prevalent, more and more prevalent in so many different parts of Asia. And like we also stand in solidarity with all those who are criminalized with this UAPA, which, if I understood correctly, is a non-bailable offenses in many cases. And moving on with the same question, I will introduce our next panelist, Sophia Chak from CCHR. Sophia is the Executive Director of the Cambodian Center for Human Rights. It's a human rights organization working for the promotion and protection of political and civil rights in Cambodia. She's a recipient of the Indian ASEAN Youth Award for Young Women Achiever category, the Franco-German Prize for Human Rights and the Rule of Law, and the 2019 Women of the Future Award Southeast Asia shortlist. So Sophia, the question is still the same, your reflection on the 2021 situation to date, and yeah, if there's any opportunities and like one specific case or something that you want to highlight from the experience in the past 1 year. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Benny, and my greeting to all panelists here, especially on this occasion of the Women's Day. My gratitude to all the women and others who have held the way for us to enjoy up to today, although we still have to struggle a lot to fight for human rights. But I believe that the effort that they have challenge to fight for equality, to fight for gender equality. Up to this point have been the effort of our previous women's activists. So today we continue the pathway to pave for the better future for our younger generation. And when we're talking about this effort, of course, as Mary and Brenda have highlighted, the situation, it's not that far different from Cambodia. We have experienced in this last few years with a severe crackdown on civil society actors, and it's very massive. At the same time, with the opposition party member have been attacked, and even the opposition party have been dissolved arbitrarily, and their right to stand for election have been deprived as well. And now we are preparing for commune council election, and the next year is national election. So again, the same cycle would repeat. We will see, but with the current situation, we can't say that we will have a credible election sooner. But back to this point, regardless the massive crackdown within this few years, and in competing to stay in power in the election in 2018, it was not a normal cycle of election that we have been experiencing in the past. It is clearly a grab for power, and the existing political and legal landscape remain, so that the civic space have been still closed up to this point. The government have introduced a number of new laws, including in the context of COVID-19, where the world, not just Cambodia, that have been affected, but COVID-19, it just not just adding the economic or mental pressure to a population, but the government have justified the COVID-19 as a way to curtail further, to legalize their arbitrary restriction on the fundamental freedom as well. So the legislation related to COVID-19 have been introduced. The National Internet Gateway have been also introduced. And there have been a pending law like cybercrime law, public order law under pipeline as well. Beyond this legislation, the ongoing judicial harassment have been increasingly targeted human rights defender. And last year, I think many of you may have followed, including Mary, who have voiced a lot of concern on a number of cases of the arrest against young activists, environmental activists, or unionists. That was the, to me, I see the trend where we see young activists are on rise. The government try to crack down against them as well. And they have the difficulty, the most targeted activist was the environmental activists, and they have been experience difficulty and a number of challenge in exercising their fundamental freedom, with restriction, with judicial harassment, and other form of violence, including sexual violence, when they are exercising their right to peaceful assembly. Beyond this case, we also witnessed a number of threats against women activists. Mary have tweeted a lot, I think, if we follow about the Friday Women's, where they often organize every Friday, and every gathering they confronted with the authority who try to grab their banner, push them back and forth. And also now with Naga World case, with it is a labor dispute where majority of the strikers are women. Some of them are pregnant women, and you know, when they exercise their fundamental freedom, especially the right to strike, they experience a number of restriction and violation, including even the access to use toilet have been restricted. Can you imagine? They have to install a tent on the street at their strike site to just, you know, you serve it as a toilet, while a number of shops nearby have been somehow instructed by the authority not to allow the striker to use that. And their union leader have been, you know, like arrested arbitrarily, you know, like few men have been there to push back and forth against a young, small lady who was the union leader, and she was dragged into the car, and now she have been in detention, and she faced the charge of incitement together with her other union members. And also the COVID-19 provision that we CSO have expressed our concern that this law will use against civil society advocates have been now clearly targeted this Naga World Union member. In addition, I just want to highlight today is a Women's Day, and over 100 of these Naga workers have been you know, arrested and brought into the detention center. I mean, not detention center, sorry, it's a quarantine center, you know, because the government tried to apply the COVID-19 prevention law. What happening was that their family have tried to bring the sanitary for some of the women, you know, on a monthly basis, that women always have that. And the security guard denied for them to you know, deliver this sanitary part for these women. So it is really upsetting when we celebrating the Women's Day, and Cambodian government have repeat many times that they respect the women's right, and in many occasions that women's dignity have to be protected. When they try to say, or they try to rule out on the dress code for women, that, you know, women should not wear sexy clothes because they want to preserve the women's dignity. But how they treat on women strikers or women activists is really our question of where is the women dignity there, you know. So I related to this case, there are also a report of sexual violence when the authority tried to track the women when they were on the strike, and this is really upsetting. And yeah, so I would just end here by sharing how the situation of human rights defender, especially the situation happening with the women human rights defender, that require our attention and our solidarity with this activists. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sophia, for sharing. I think the world attention is really into the Naga World case, and we saw that yesterday. Michelle Bachelet, in her statement, also mentioned this specific case. And moving on to our next speaker is Haris Azhar. Haris Azhar is a lawyer, human rights defender, and a part-time lecturer. He co-founded Lokataru Foundation back in 2018, an organization focusing on strategic litigation and research. He also established hakasasi.id, an online platform on human rights and digital-based research and also publication. He was also the executive director of one of the largest human rights NGO in Indonesia, Contrast, from 2010 to 2016. So yeah, Haris, so what is your reflection on the 2021 on the Indonesia situation, and is there anything that you think we should put attention into it?
Yeah, thank you. Very good afternoon and also good evening. to everybody, and also I would like to join my happiness and also celebration and also solidarity on the day for the International Women's Rights Day. Thank you also to Mary, and also thank you for your letter regarding the case that I have last year. But let me put myself and also Fatia, the other victim on this case, as a part of the wave, the big wave, a bigger wave year by year in Indonesia, where women's rights defenders like Fatia and also or human rights defenders in general have been persecuted by the government, by the law enforcement entities, and also by the non-government, let's say as a gongos, who keep attacking us. But in general, I would like to start by the situation in Indonesia, pretty much related to the business sector issue or business issues, where in Indonesia last year or for the last 2 years, we have been through a very big debates about the new law. We call it the omnibus law on the job creations, but actually this law has been content with so many flaws, and also being criticized by quite a wide range of civil society, because this law it's like a more than 70 sector issues being integrated in one law. So there is a issue of license for business, land issues, many things. So at the end, we find out and we get more and more evidence that why this omnibus law being promoted, defended, and also speed up to be issued as a legal one, because a lot of those who are sitting in the political entities, they are so much connected to the business issues. I mean, this is quite obvious in many places, but I think a lot of us here agree that the political issues is always connected with the business issues, including the COVID issues. The COVID-19 issues is also connected the way that the policy is connected to those who are running the business on the COVID, how you call it, the COVID policies as well. So I think the way that the circulation of business and the public policy or public decisions, policy decision is also only among a very limited persons, and also give a lot of interest and benefit to them. And of course, this situation being criticized by a lot of academicians, human rights defenders, who are sitting in the NGOs, defenders by situation, let me put it like that. It means like those who came from a certain communities, only focus on a certain issues, but also they came up to the public through the social media or through the actions, the physical actions. They criticize and they being targeted. The way they being targeted is first, like in Papua, these victims being targeted or attacked through the identity issues. So the business and the identity, it's like those who have the interest with the business issues, they always come up with or they will let a certain group to attack the whistleblowers the messengers to the public by defame the identity, by attacking the identity, or they do the physical attack. I think what Benny present is quite happening here. Physical attack, limit the access under the name of the COVID-19 protections. Then also we have these days the term digital tortures or doxing to the defenders, or take over the social media. I was the victim also last year, and a lot of friends being targeted to that kind of operations. Judicial harassment, of course, last year 2020, it's the highest for the last 4 years. The judicial harassments to the women human rights defenders and to the laborers, especially to the journalists and also to the indigenous groups, and also to the youth, to the student groups. They were targeted, persecuted also, not only by the law enforcement entities, but also by the universities, those who are run the universities, because in Indonesian's regulations, that the universities, the rector need to be approved by the government. These are also happen through the administration's attack. I call it as administration attacks. Like the youth, the final thesis, they will be criticized irregularly by the teachers or by the lecturers in their universities. So the model of attacks, the pattern is also quite not only led by one strong police group or the intelligence group, no, but it goes through the system of administration in many sectors. To that point, from that point, I would raise up the issue that in Indonesia, it's getting centralized. The power, the politics, and the business is getting centralized, controlled by the central government, by the central administrations. From the business point of view, from the political point of view, the central government is getting it's back like the new order regime during the military dictatorship regime. It's very centralized by the central government. So and also, since this is the era of digital, it's also
sorry, Bang Haris, can we wrap up in 30 seconds? Sorry.
Yeah, so I think the things that I would like to come up as the conclusion, I think I already made that in Indonesia it's getting centralized. Therefore, I think the issue of democratizations that led by some human rights defenders, by oppositions, by journalists, by independent groups is very important. Develop more tools and also guarantees and also protections from the international range is very important. So I think I'm looking forward to Mary and also friends in UN and also globally that on how that let's say for on how to democratize the business sectors, the technology sectors, and also the transition on the political side, the transition issues as well is very important on how to keep yelling out from the UN, from the international entities on how to let the Indonesian government to be strict with the constitutions. I'll stop there. Then I hope that we can discuss more further. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bang Haris. I think for recommendation we will have like the second part of the discussion that we can explore further as well. So without further ado, I will move on to Muhammad Ashrafuzzaman or Zaman. He's a Bangladeshi human rights defender based in Hong Kong since 2005. He heads the Bangladesh country program at the Asian Human Rights Commission, and he also the main representative to the UN on behalf of the Asian Legal Resource Center. Zaman, we have the same question on your reflection of the situation, and then the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Benny, and thank you Forum Asia and all other organizations who have jointly hosted this program. And thanks to Special Rapporteur Mary Lawlor for joining us. So 2021, as the question, I mean, for all of us, how we recall it, in the perspective of Bangladesh, for the human rights defenders of that country, it was challenging like everywhere in the region that we have seen, facing an illegitimate kleptocrat, authoritarian, or rather we should say fascist government due to its characteristics and actions, and the human rights defenders defying all sort of repressions of this government. They have documented the history of the year, that the history of the ordinary people and the dissidents who have faced the draconian legislations and the cruelest forms of human rights abuses, including enforced disappearances, extrajudicial killings in the pretext of war on drugs and on various excuses, and systemic torture. And whoever, I mean, and when we talk about human rights, as Brinda initially said, it also covers a wide range of professionals. That includes the facilitators of justice in whichever way, or whoever, I mean, facilitates the process of expression of the people, the opinion makers of the people. So that also includes journalists to some extent who keeps their professionalism and do the work objectively from their respective professional backgrounds and perspectives. So we are talking about those people in Bangladesh who had the spirit of resilience and then continued documenting the human rights violations, kept raising their voices against corruption, and they faced the consequences, like my colleagues right now, Adilur Rahman Khan and Nasiruddin Elan. They have been facing prosecution in a cybercrime case. And I should thank Mary for the communications that she had done with the Bangladesh government, and and also tweeted on this issue. But then I must tell you that they are not the only victims of that. There are hundreds of human rights defenders and journalists, cultural activists, trade union activists across the country who are facing similar situation. Right now, the colleagues are visiting, get visits by the Rapid Action Battalions in their homes for helping the victims of enforced disappearances to raise their voices. It's last night it was also the same. The day before yesterday, at midnight, Rapid Action Battalion officers were visiting the home of the human rights defenders. While being a journalist, also he works in a newspaper, so he was not at home. And then the Rapid Action Battalion officers were interrogating his wife, who was physically sick. So the human rights defenders have been facing this throughout the year. And after that, you know, the December, the important event is the US designated sanctions against Rapid Action Battalion, the Department of Treasury. That's one of the most welcomed actions by any international entity so far happened about Bangladesh, in the context that the country's judiciary acts as an extended hands of the government. So the entire justice mechanism, when we talk about judiciary, we cannot conceive the judiciary that we see in the functional democracies of the world. So when we talk about judiciary in a country like Bangladesh, then we have to understand that this is a judiciary is not to give justice to the people. This is a judicial system. The entire system is to empower the fascist regime and suppress the voice of the people, suppress the human rights defenders, suppress the civil society actors, suppress the people's right to freedom of assembly and association, suppress the people's right to have their political franchise, the right to franchise. And in a country, there is no legitimate election for decade. And it's everything is in a way, I must say now, because Mary won't be with us in the next part of the discussion, that one of the things that Bangladeshi human rights defenders face and also try to document is that how the state bribes the powerful states. So this is one of the tasks. For example, in November, Bangladesh Prime Minister visited United Kingdom and France and signed military deals with the two countries. Both of them are the permanent members of the UN Security Council. So when we buy 5 naval ships from UK or you buy other military hardwares from France, so you make $1 million deal with both states. And this is a government which systematically rigged the election in 2014, rigged the election in 2018, and has planned to rig the upcoming election in 2023. So all that happened with the support of these developed democracies or powerful countries. They have a deal with now it's 12.5 billion almost with Russia for the nuclear power in Rupur, and that's a potential disaster. Maybe Bangladesh may face another Chernobyl in the coming years. We don't know the way it is being managed in a highly populated area, and then the top most powerful nation.
Really sorry, Zaman. I might need to cut you off a bit here, and then we can continue in the second part because Mary needs to leave, and I think it will be good to hear her thoughts on what has been shared. I think we have been go into
Can
deeper.
I share in 30 seconds?
Sure. Please,
okay.
Please.
So in the presentation of the human rights special rapporteur's report on human rights defenders, maybe in the future plan, the special rapporteur can initiate studies on that, and also the urge to all these nations that their commitment to democracy and human rights should be demonstrated in public, and their policies and decisions should not be influenced by the bribery of the state levels, particularly from the unelected, illegitimate governments of the global south, the developing nations. So I will stop here and we will come back for the discussion next. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zaman. Mary, over to you. I think there's a lot of mention about corruption, business, and everything as well.
Thank you. First of all, Mohammed, can you email me exactly your suggestion there that you just made about a further study? It would be interesting for me to, because you were cut short, and I know it's my fault because I have to go, but I have another thing on now. So what do I say? It's so clear that human rights defenders all over Asia and in the countries that you have particularly highlighted, there are a myriad group of people. You know, it's not just NGO workers, it's journalists, it's students, it's trade unionists. All of them can have indigenous people can have a defending role for which they are targeted. And I mean, to me, it always looks, when I see all this happening, when I see the COVID restrictions you've talked about, when I see the weaponization of laws and the misuse of counter-terrorism laws to to restrict and silence human rights defenders and to create a chilling effect. I mean, it just points to the determination of the state to stop any kind of critical human rights work. And they use everything in their arsenal, for want of a better word, to do that. And just a couple of points, like Linda, I'm meeting the Indian ambassador this afternoon at the permanent mission. So I'll be glad to transmit to him the points that you made today, and very well made, a very good overview. I feel I'm well prepared going in. I know a fair bit about the situation, but you did it so succinctly. So thank you very much for that. And particularly, as you said, you know, the targeting of Muslim human rights defenders is so prevalent now. And then Cambodia. I mean, Sophia, I've been keeping an eye on Cambodia, as you know, and the crackdown that has been taking place, and the legalization, you know, the legislation and the internet and cybercrime sort of stuff that is all part of this mix. And the fact that the fact that the election is upcoming, and of course we always know that election time there's more of a risk to human rights defenders. But what I find very problematic is the fact that young activists are being targeted, almost to prevent them even starting out on their human rights journey. So that is something I really want to keep an eye on. And then, sorry, Indonesia, of course. Thank you very much. That was very interesting for me, because I need to do more work in Indonesia, to be frank. Because although I have some idea, I mean, I have an overall view, an overall understanding, but this law that you were talking about, this omnibus law, and the way it has almost been designed to gather in anyone under any kind of pretext to try and stop them. You know, so that is something that I realize I need more about. So maybe you could keep me abreast of what's happening there. And then, you know, when we get to Bangladesh, I mean, I found it very interesting well, I know about the judiciary, obviously, and the fact that there are the different kinds of human rights defenders that have been targeted, including bloggers, but the business about the supply and the deals that prominent members of the Security Council and the military deals that they are doing with each other, and you know, supporting the elections are rigged, and almost with the support of powerful states. I'd like to hear more about you. Sorry, I've been talking all morning and have no water. So if you could also, after this, maybe through Benny can send all this stuff in one document to me. Thank you very much. I really have to go. I'm 8 minutes late for the next one. Bye.
Thank you so much, Mary. Thank you so much for joining, and sorry for taking a bit more time. So yeah, we can continue to the second part of the discussion, mainly like touching on like what are like the concrete recommendations that, I mean, we are all attending here. I believe we are all like human rights defenders or supporting human rights defenders, supporting the cause. Like what can we do together as a community? I think we, Forum Asia's data, as you see, like we have 80-something% state actors, but I think in the discussion we saw that is just like the tip of the iceberg. There's like a lot of things happening on the ground at the roots level that needs to be addressed as well. So maybe we can touch on that issue specific. If I may I start with Zaman? Apologies because I was cutting you short earlier. So yeah, Zaman, if you can start, you have like 4 to 5 minutes. Thank you.
Please repeat the question once more time.
Yeah, the question is on the recommendation, like how this year will look like and in the future, and any recommendation concretely that we can send it to the stakeholders or even us as a civil society, how we can do better. Yeah.
Of course. I mean, the list may be, quite a lot of things. When in a country, hardly you can enjoy any of your right with a belief that you will be safe. So every day, a human rights defender, knows that it may be another new day, and there may be a lot of new challenges, and they have to handle it in their innovative and creative ways out of the skills that they have. So in that situation, the first thing in the case of Bangladesh, what comes is there needs to be legitimate government with people's mandate through a free, fair, transparent, inclusive elections. And the ballot boxes should not be stuffed overnight on the previous night of the election. That's what happened in December 2018. So, and then 2014, the government was formed by unelected, unopposed ruling party candidates, because all the oppositions, left and right, centrist, every parties, they boycotted the election, because everyone knew that there is no point of contesting the election. So in that situation, when the government renews power, and then it uses all of its teeth and claws, jaws to, extend the repressive apparatus of the state against everybody. So, and it happens in many other ways. So that is the first and, foremost matter to consider. The international community has a great role. The UN Human Rights Council has a great role. And particularly the UN Peacekeeping Operations Department has a great role, because all the human rights violations, like crime against humanity, is enforced disappearances. And that happens consistently in Bangladesh by the security forces, the military and police, rapid action battalion, the border guards. So unless those people face the consequences from the domestic justice mechanism, the people have no resort to go. For over a decade, 13, 14 years, these things are happening. These crimes are taking place with impunity. So if we say, like most of the UN special procedure mandates say, investigate, prosecute, and punish, this conventional statement is valueless in the context of Bangladesh. That we need to explain the international experts that why it may work in a country like, maybe Denmark or Sweden, but it may not, it simply doesn't work in Bangladesh. So in this context, first you need the government with people's mandate, then you need the change of various institutions that should followed by that, and without pressure that will never come up. So that pressure has to come, all those agencies, international entities, multilateral bodies that has been supporting this government, unfortunately, for more than a decade. And then there is one mistake that the global communities do, that, okay, there is a female prime minister is working for empowering the women. That's a very foolish understanding. This is no difference between Vladimir Putin and Sheikh Hasina in Bangladesh. What Vladimir Putin is doing in Russia, the same thing Sheikh Hasina is doing in Bangladesh. So we need to understand that, not looking by the face, we need to look at the actions and the policies, what are being implemented there. So, we need to correct our understandings about Bangladesh, without being fooled by the faces and by the statements that the governments are making. And I must thank the government of United States for, initiating this designation of sanctions by the Department of Treasury, and also the visa bans against the chief of police, and also one of the commanders, the military officer, colonel, right now serving in the Prime Minister's, defense force, special security force, SSF. So, but then this should be also endorsed by through actions, the other governments with their Magnitsky legislations. The government of Canada, government of UK, the European Union, they have a very frustrating role in the case of Bangladesh's human rights. I must say that with my disappointment, but they need to correct their policy, and even the policy in paper, I know that there are, but it should be translated to their actions, and that should be publicly visible, that they really have commitment to human rights, and that people is getting the benefits of that implementation of that policy. And then the other special procedure bodies, they need to keep raising their voice more than before. So more special rapporteurs or working groups should, talk about the situation of Bangladesh. I want to suggest the special procedures now that these physical country visits, many governments don't allow. Right now, the way we are hosting this side event through virtual technologies, I think they should adopt these technologies and have the country visits virtually by, talking to the victims, and also the civil societies who are actively engaged in independently about the human rights situation, and the country-based UN officials, and we, the human rights organizations, regional organizations particularly, whom the law enforcement agencies cannot directly catch, but we can still think that we might be safe. We can facilitate the process with the help of the activists who are based in the country and the victims based in the country. They should come up with the new concept of virtual country visits to get the access to the people and know the realities in the cases where the governments are physically depriving them from the country visit, denying their access to the country in person. So I know that my time is finished. Okay, I will stop here, and if there is more questions, so I'll respond to that. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Zamani. I think I got some keywords like free and fair election is key, and like impunity, accountability is like really key to be addressed as well. And we definitely will like sum up all the discussions and send it to Mary's for her recommendation as well. And yeah, without further ado, I will pass on the microphone, the floor to Vrinda to share her recommendations and insights for like what we can do better together. Please.
Thanks, Benny. Listening to my co-panelists as well as Mary, I think what becomes clear to us is that the state is scared. The state fears human rights defenders. The kind of repression that we are seeing is happening because the state is actually fearful of the work that and the concerns and the voice that human rights defenders raise and represent. And I think what is important perhaps at this juncture is to once again have a global campaign, in particular, definitely in Asia, where we focus upon the critical role of human rights defenders in all countries, particularly those that claim that they are democratic countries. And the demonization of human rights defenders that has taken place over the years, which has led to all forms of misinformed and wrong perceptions being formed in people's heads, because human rights defenders are there acting on behalf of the peoples of their country. And therefore, to label them as anti-national, to label them as working against the interests of the country, is the demonization which the state is doing effectively because of the resources and the machinery that it has at its command and which technology today enables. We therefore definitely need regional, global, and national campaigns of reasserting the very significant role human rights defenders will play to counter this demonization, because eventually it will be the support and solidarity of the people on whose behalf human rights defenders act, which will in the long run compel the state to stop this kind of repression, or to at least be challenged on that count. The second point I would make is that we have, at least in India, a range of human rights institutions, including national human rights commissions and state human rights commission, whose primary and sole objective is to advance, protect, promote, respect human rights. And therefore, human rights defenders are the natural partners of these statutory bodies. These statutory bodies, however, barely pay lip service to human rights defenders and should be the ones who are constantly questioning and raising issues when human rights defenders are targeted as they are today in India and elsewhere. So NHRCs, when they are getting their accreditation, when they are participating in UN as well as other global and regional events, they need to be questioned over and over again on the aspect of human rights defenders. I think what is very clear, that I don't need to say to a panel like this or to a program like this, human rights defenders are key to any human rights being respected and protected in every country across the world. Therefore, we need to put the focus there. So simply having, say, in our NHRC, a nodal point where you keep informing about violations and some kind of process of paperwork is done is not the compliance that can be accepted from the human rights entities in the country. At the UN level, India will soon be submitting its reports for the Universal Periodic Review. You also have all the other processes. Again, all member states, we need to point out how literally human rights defenders are the foundation on which the respect and the protection of all human rights depend. And therefore, to once again ensure that concerns with respect to human rights defenders are raised, and their ability to do their work freely, without fear and without repression. I also want to point towards technology. Technology both to use to present our viewpoint, but also the use of technology today by the state, particularly when freedom of expression, freedom of assembly is being used. And I'm sure this is commonplace across Asia. The use of surveillance, the use of facial recognition, the use of videography by the state. These are all ways in which states, governments are actually creating data against human rights defenders. And these are something that I hope the UNSRs will put out joint reports about, as to what kind of use of technology has to be prohibited against human rights defenders who are engaged in peaceful democratic processes, seeking questioning and seeking accountability from the state. I would also think that again, a joint initiative by different UNSRs, which we saw post when the counterterrorism laws, etc., were being made for purposes of security of state, etc. There needs to be a joint initiative where you have the UNSR on human rights defenders and the UNSR on counterterrorism talking together on the abuse of this law, particularly targeting human rights defenders. This is not about the security of the state, and the security of the people has too long been divorced from each other, and we are seeing the results of that. The issue of incarceration for long periods as under trials and pre-trials, knowing very well that this material will not withstand judicial scrutiny, and how legal process has become is being abused to repress. These are again aspects on which I think different UNSRs need to come together and put out joint general recommendations, comments, etc. for all states to be held answerable to. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Frinda. I think there's a lot of points that we can take here as well, like collaboration between special rapporteurs that needs to be strengthened as well. And this is how we can like counter this negative narrative that was created by the government because they are afraid of the work of defenders. That's very important. I will pass on the same questions to Sophia on what is your hope and recommendations and on how we can tackle this together as a community.
Thank you, Benny, for the floor. I think the hope is still there. The hope that, you know, like with the rising of the young community, young activists who stand up for their rights, and also, you know, like because this is the inspiration for us to keep doing our daily work, even, you know, in this difficult time. Even during the closing space. But I believe that, like many of us have already raised that, you know, the government becomes scared, and the repression happening because they are resistant. So if we see the repression as the dark side, we should also look at the light side, that, you know, it was the resistance by the community. And they need our support. They need our solidarity. Therefore, my key ask to the UN and diplomat community is to stand up with the civil society actor, you know, speaking publicly, denouncing the abuse of human rights in any circumstance, because their voice, you know, publicly is the it is the solidarity message, and also a signal to the government that they are watching what is happening, and it can help to deter certain worst scenario as well. If the diplomat community become you know, like silent, or, you know, many, I think the dynamic have changed because many diplomat community, and because of the change of foreign policy as well, you know, they start to feel that, you know, they have to play with a kind of closed door dialogue, or a soft approach, rather than to speak up publicly. I think we as civil society don't deny that engagement is important. Speaking behind the scene is also necessary, but they have to also value the public statement, and this is something we keep recalling to many diplomat community to do so. And for UN special rapporteur like Mary and other, especially for Cambodia, we have a UN special rapporteur on situation of human rights, Professor Wittip. We encourage him to continue speaking up and, you know, be the voice of support to human rights defender. And for CSO, I think there's a really key role for us as civil society organization to stay engaged with the UN mechanism like UPO, ICCPO review, or, you know, with the human rights review session. We have to engage, stay informed, and stay updated with the UN special rapporteur, and utilize any mechanism that we can. And keep our concerted effort together with other partners, locally and internationally, to extend our solidarity, not just for Cambodian context, but, you know, things happening, for example, in Myanmar or elsewhere, we should, extend our solidarity together, because the effect of the crackdown in specific country would be spill over in the region as well. So we need to make sure that we give hand to one another. And also it's important when it comes to the human right protection, I think for us to equip well with this whole holistic human right defender protection mechanism, make sure that we have enough resource and be ready to offer them, to offer to activists at risk, with the legal, with the security, and other necessary support, so that they are we can offer them necessary support when needed. Especially, I think one thing that many of us often ignore or forgot is the mental health support. That is really important, not just for the human right defender that we extend the support, but for our colleague at office. I think many of us as a human right defender, when we say that a human right defender, we have to remember that we are human. So we really need, mental health support. So, establish or a habit, or, incorporate the well-being activity within our office and extend it to the community is important. Especially in the context of COVID, it is also important. And yes, try to be available on the ground, observing the situation, like monitoring the protests, etc., and hearing, observe the trial, and extend the prison visit. These are the things that many HRD in Cambodia, I believe elsewhere, have repeatedly request that these are necessary for them. So yeah, that's it from me. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sophie. I like your analogy that the resistance is the light side of the opposite of the dark. So I think, yeah, we need to continue make a ripple effects of this lighter side, like continue our resistance together. And moving on to our last speaker, Haris. Yeah, what is your hope and like your recommendations for the civil society and also like other stakeholders to be able to better protect the defenders?
Yeah, thank you. I think I have three sectors on how to look forward to continue to achieve the virtue in our works, in our struggles. So I think to exercise more on how to implement the issue of dismantling. Before I continue, I would like to come up with the methodology by saying that the way we face the situations, which I think is not going to in a good way, because I look at the trend is getting worse and worse. I think we need to look at the root cause, which I think we need to look at more to the groups, sectors where these harassment, persecutions keep running and worsening to us or to some other, many others defenders across the continent. So I think first of all on how to look at the business sector groups, the place where the money exists and where the money determine on how to dismantle the how you call it, the operations of the money investment, who get what from the business issues. Therefore, I think it is important on how to look at the ability to access the data across the group, because since decades ago in the world, they have a big issue on how to the finance reform issues, which push forward to many countries on how to be transparent to see the transactions. That's why they, in every countries, they obliged to have the one big important entities, institutions on how to see, to prevent the money laundering, sort of like that. They are not working alone. These perpetrators, these criminals, they also on the ground cause this kind of violence, attack to the human rights defenders, environmental defenders, indigenous groups. So I think we need to work more on the business issues, on the industrial issues, investment issues, on how to see they work across the country, because money and investment, they are not, they don't care about the borders. They just transfer, make offshore companies, sort of like that. And they also working a lot in many situations. I found it that the business group also collide very strong to the policymakers, the administration groups. So the conflict of interest, there should be like a report about conflict of interest. I think the global communities also need to widespread more works on how to see how the model or the pattern of conflict of interest in many situations. I haven't found that kind of issues. The last time we had the Pandora report, I think we need to have more that kind of things to see the root cause. The second, I think, the issue of the reform agenda. It has been, how you call it, stuck, the reform agenda on how to do the reform with the judicial system, with the police system. I think this is important on how to, because they become, in our discussion, I would say they become the tools by the interest group on how to deteriorate, to push back the defenders. The third one, the last one, my hope, my suggestions, it's on how to work more to two entities. One is the youth, because the youth is become something, it's moving, but they have their own language these days. But also we need to think, this is not difficult, the second one, the last one, on how we talk to the devils, to the perpetrators on the ground. Because the perpetrators, the oppressors, is not only from the system, but also from outside of the system. Those who mobilize, those who paid, those who threatening, and also they support the government. Now they have to be re-engaged. We need to re-engage again with them. It's difficult, I know, but the informations, the witnesses, the important witnesses also can come from the perpetrators. It's the ethical issues. It's the difficult issues on how to talk to them. Samantha Powers, a former US ambassador to Geneva, to UN, before in that position, she wrote a book. It's very famous, Shake Hand with the Devils. But after she shake hand with the devils, he found out so many stories in her books. So I think it's very, it's quite something on how to think and who to operate that kind of models, talk to the devils. It's just the metaphor, which I mean that on how we work with those who are there to create, to involve, who are involved with the oppressions. So this is in the post-conflict discussion we call DDR, disarmament, reintegrations. But we need to elaborate more that conceptions into our situations. So I think these are the issues which we need to think on how we push back, because human rights is it's always getting ambigu to the other ambiguity. You know, we develop more things on papers, the institutions, but the worsening situations, the violation is also keep happening. So the disparity is getting wide and wide. We need to reduce. That's why the transition issues is very important, because the state, the government, the transition within the government, it's a key factor on how to push the business sector to oblige to the government, and also how the reform with the state apparatus can be happen, and also on how to give the leadership to the wide range of the people or the society. I'll stop there. I'll limit there. I'm pretty enjoy with all the recommendation that came up from Zaman, from Sopip, and also from the whole discussions, and also so I think that's all from me. Thank you very much, Benny. I'll give it back to you.
Thank you very much, Haris. I think there's a lot of food for thoughts here, especially like shaking hand with the devil. Like, we need to make sure we're not going to their side after like try to initiate this handshaking thingy. Yeah, I think we are running out of time, so I would like to give the floor back to the speakers for like a closing remarks, 1 minute closing remarks, like to wrap up this discussion. So maybe we can start with Zaman first, please.
Sure, thank you very much. I want to draw everyone's attention to the context that Bangladesh uses the Israeli spying surveillance technologies to surveil against human rights defenders and victims, journalists, I mean, whoever has a dissenting voice. So in that context, the UN Special Rapporteur, the mandates on business and human rights, has a lot of role to play. They need to enhance and intensify their engagement and focusing on the issues and the countries, particularly the controlling of social media by the government and the smear campaign against the dissidents on behalf of the government. That is being practiced across the region, particularly in Bangladesh, very deliberately, and then using draconian legislations like Digital Security Act and Information Communications Technology Act, Anti-Terrorism Act, all these things against the dissenting voices, opposition activists. So the UN mandates should consider this context, and they need to compel the business and human rights, obligations of the global tech giants who are operating across the region globally, particularly in the regimes under the authoritarian regimes, the jurisdictions, wherever people like Vladimir Putin or Sheikh Hasina are the same characters who are ruling the countries without legitimacy. So they need to work on that, and we would be happy to help whenever it is needed. So that is number one. And the second thing I want to say to all the victims of and human rights defenders, my fellow journalist colleagues and friends, that you are not isolated, you are not alone. Your work is highly valued and is necessary more than ever right now. So please keep defying that illegitimate government, and also keep up your work. And the whole world's human rights community, particularly who are working in the region, are with you. So we are ready to help and engage you with the rest of the world. So I thank you very much once again for hosting the meeting.
Thank you, Zaman. Sophia?
Well, yeah, my last word is that my message to all human rights defenders: keep doing what we believe it is the right thing to do, and it is our right to do so, and never give up. And we together can stand up for human rights, and only when we continue to do so, we don't let the crackdown be the victory. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sophia. And lastly, Haris, please.
Yeah, I almost got the last talk, but it's okay. But I think I have nothing further to talk. But I think it's I'm looking more further to have the implementations of our hopes. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone. On behalf of Forum Asia and also the co-sponsor of this event, OMCT, CIVICUS, and also ISHR, we would like to thank you, everyone. And then we'll try to come up with a summary of this discussion, because there's, I think, a lot of insights coming in, and we will also send the recommendation to Mary directly so that she can take up. And in the meantime, yeah, we will stay strong together. And I think this kind of discussion we will need to have a bit more often to refresh our ideas and also strengthen our solidarity. So yeah, we can have a continuation of Milk Tea Alliance over and over across Asia. Yeah, on behalf of our organizer, I would like to thank you, everyone, and have a nice rest of the day to everyone. Thank you so much for attending.
Thank you.